I'd like to welcome everybody to our regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting on Wednesday, June 22nd, 2022, 5:30 p.m. I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting to order and establish a quorum.
Board President Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
Board Member Cara Palestrini.
Yes.
Board Member Seabury Nakbar.
Yes.
Great. May I please receive a motion to adopt the agenda?
Make a motion to adopt the agenda.
I second.
Board President Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
Board Member Cara Palestrini.
Yes.
Board Member Seabury Nakbar.
Yes.
All right, and this evening we'll be adjourning into closed session before reconvening to open session. So before we adjourn to closed session, I'll go ahead and identify the closed session agenda items, and seeing that there is no public comment on these, we will adjourn straight away. Closed session agenda item 2A is conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation pursuant to Government Code 54956. Are we okay? Oh, it's okay. 54956.9 subdivision D4. There are two cases there. Closed session agenda item 2B is public employee discipline, dismissal, release, complaints pursuant to Government Code 54957 subdivision B1. Closed session agenda item 2C, public employee performance evaluation pursuant to Government Code 54957 superintendent. And last but not least, closed session agenda item 2D is conference with labor negotiators, Government Code Section 54957.6, Subdivision A. Agency designated representative is the Board of Education, and the unrepresented employee is our superintendent. So with that, we will go ahead and adjourn to closed and see you when we reconvene to open. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I am so sorry that we ran late in closed session. So my deepest apologies that we are 25 minutes late. So we'll go ahead and we'll get everything started. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. The board took the following action in closed session. I'll go ahead and do that readout now. This was regarding closed session agenda item A, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation pursuant to code 54956.9 subdivision D42 cases. The board directed the initiation of litigation in an education matter. Information regarding this matter will be disclosed to any person upon inquiry once litigation has been commenced, unless to do so would jeopardize the ability to effectuate service or would jeopardize the district's ability to conclude existing settlement negotiations to its advantage. The readout for closed session agenda item B, this is public employee discipline dismissal release complaints pursuant to Government Code 54957 subdivision B1. The board took action with a 5-0 unanimous vote to approve the involuntary demotion and reassignment of a classified employee effective immediately. The board directs the superintendent or designee to provide appropriate notice to the employee. And with that, we will go ahead and commence the open session of this meeting. So again, welcome everybody to our regularly scheduled board meeting on Wednesday, June 22nd, 2022. If I could please have Carl Palestrini do the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd also like to notify the audience today that the open session portion of this meeting will be audio taped and broadcast. And we'll move on to agenda item 3D. This is public comment on non-agendized and open session items. So this is where any member of the public who's here this evening can address the board on items on the open session agenda or topics within the board's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda at this time. If you choose to participate in public comment, you'll be allotted 3 minutes. Do we have anybody here that would like to make a public comment? Okay, seeing that there is none, we will move on to agenda item 3E. And this is ACT CSCA comments, Board of Education Superintendent. These are routine status updates regarding any activities. Obviously, there hasn't been much this summer. So I will go ahead and start this evening with our ACT representatives. Sorry.
I don't do this bill normally. Thank you. Mark Stafford, ACT Vice President, and as I said, Bill Schreier's not feeling well today, so he's at home. So we're going to fill in. And what I wanted to say today is I just wanted to reflect on our negotiations process. I was the negotiations chair, and Anne-Marie knows that we went through a couple days of training, which was really productive. And we did this with our entire team, so our whole rep council was there. So not just our negotiators, but also all the other ACT leadership was present at the training. It was a really valuable training. I think that the interest-based bargaining process and philosophy was pretty intuitive for a lot of the people in the room. We all just kind of wanted to work together and try and find solutions to problems. So not only did we get a good training, but I think we had a good group of people that were really interested in solving problems. So it was something that, it's not something that I would say I was looking forward to, negotiating a contract, but it ended up being a really positive experience. It was a really collaborative experience. It was a really good learning experience. We were in the room with CSEA for the first time that I am aware of, which was also really enlightening and powerful and created connection and trust, I think, across all of the groups involved. So the process, I think, if I had to pick one word to describe it, was collaborative. I think it was really, really collaborative. I personally, with Bill, meet with Ted and Craig on a regular basis and have experienced that kind of collaboration in a small group setting, but this was a large group that was every bit as collaborative. It was really encouraging. People asked how it would go, and I, without giving details to my members, I'd say I'm really hopeful. It was really, really hopeful and collaborative and positive. So to say that about negotiating a contract, I don't think that's always what happens. So I'm pleased to report that was my experience as the negotiation chair. Our executive board is here as well tonight, kind of just in support of that statement. The executive board gets the report from the negotiating team and has to approve any agreements that the negotiation team makes, just like the superintendent comes to the school board. So that's our process. The communication, I think, was clear, and yeah, our members were happy with the process. And yeah, like I said, Anne-Marie was there, and I'm sure she's kind of shared with you her experiences of that training as well. It was a really positive training. The training was, I think, put on by CTA, but had a CTA rep and a district attorney, a school district attorney there facilitating. And then we managed, I think, pretty well to facilitate the negotiation process ourselves without an outside facilitator, which I think is also a credit to the district and the teachers. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have a representative from CSCA here this evening for an update? No? Okay. Moving on, we'll do any updates from the Board of Education. We'll go ahead and start with you. Okay? I know. We have quite the agenda this evening, so I will waive mine as well. Carl? I'm going to waive it as well. Okay. Anne-Marie?
I had one meeting for Career Tech Ed. And I just want to let you know that there were two bills that are going to be coming up before the Assembly, AB 2044, extending the graduation requirements to be from CTE to be applied to graduating seniors for the next 5 years. So that's a positive thing for CTE. Looks like it's something that's taking on value. The other one is AB 2058, and it's looking on increasing the funding for Career Tech Ed. Going forward. So those were the two bills that they were working on and trying to sway their influence up in Sacramento. I wanted to say about IBB, interspace bargaining. It was exceptional to collaborate with you guys. On the little portion that I was in there, it was so much fun. I really enjoyed it. And what I really that I was talking to somebody about just the other day was, you put the elephants out in the room first. You talk about those right away, and I really like that. You get all that nonsense off the table right away, and I liked it when we switched the roles from admin to staff and staff to admin. Yes, Kathy, we had a good time sitting next to one another. Thank you. She was a school board member. We had a good time. I also wanted to say two things. I would like to put it out there to people that I would like to see anti-bias training for the board members to go to. I think that it is very important. I think that we need to be aware of inclusion and how our things are perceived. I was down in Disneyland just a little bit ago, and I had a moment where I had to actually stop. It was all in my head, and I had to stop and say, wait a second, you made this assumptive leap about somebody that you don't know about just based on how they looked and how they were speaking, and you have no clue about it. And the person started talking on his phone, and it was like, whoa, wait a second, where did that come from? And it was just, I need to go back and take more anti-bias training. I really needed to just check myself. So I'm going to put it out there. I'd also like to say, now that we have finished the evaluation process for our superintendent, I think that the school board individually and collectively needs to have, we need to be evaluated as well. So I'm going to put it out there for the people that be. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Tess?
I had a community human services meeting, and they are knocking it out of the park with the number of children and for the homeless and the mental health issues out there. They are adding services left and right, and I know they're going to be coming and doing a presentation to the board at some point, and I think it's really important for us to always remember that when we have a homeless problem, it's not their problem, it's all of our problems, and I just really appreciate what they do for those in our county. So that's all I'll say.
Great, thank you. And I'm looking forward to the presentation from Community Human Services. So hopefully that can happen soon. With that said, I'll pass it off to you, Ted, before we move on.
Thank you. I would say Anne Marie Mark also did a better job of being superintendent than me in that training as well. I think he got picked for that. So a couple updates. As you know, we're going to go through our kind of 6 big topics in all of my reports. But before I start, I do want to give an update on the district office reorganization. We're now fully hired. Craig and team have done a ton of work. I want to thank staff for their collaboration. Every one of these folks was chosen from a diverse group of classified, certified, and admin staff. Of the new folks, or newer, we have 2 with us tonight. Diana Gonzalez is our senior director of budget. She has hit the ground running and has just been a wonderful addition. I don't know that any of us work harder than Yvonne, but it has been nice. She actually took a day off recently because she knows that we have help here. And so want to welcome Diana. And then behind Diana is Sharon Ofick, who is our new Deputy Superintendent of Educational Services. She will be starting here in, gosh, I think it's like a week already. So we're happy to have her, again, unanimously selected by a diverse group of people. And we're excited. She spent a little bit of the afternoon with us today and got to know everybody. And so we're happy to have her here. Let's see, kind of to go through our big 6. COVID, no new guidance, but we are continuing to see cases on the rise with adults. We're continuing to work with CDPH to offer tests, most of which are moving towards at-home tests. So we're starting to kind of predict that when we come back to school in August, that testing might be primarily at home, where we'll just be supplying those. On our later start times for secondary students, we had our meeting with Hanover, was very productive. They're currently putting together a work plan, and that work plan will start with a white paper for all of our community that is going to combine 2 things, what the research tells us about later start times for students, as well as what other districts like ours throughout the country who have been able to implement later start times, what they've done. So they're going to share with us kind of a best practice manual. They're also starting to look at the survey and then what focus groups we might need. So making some great progress with those folks, and they really know what they're doing. We met with a team of about 3 or 4 of them a week or so ago. As far as our stadium lights project, we are anticipating receiving that revised draft EIR in the coming weeks, and so that'll be coming to staff first, and then public viewing. Districting, we know we're having our second pre-map presentation tonight, so I won't steal any thunder there. On our, you guys remember maybe a month or 2 ago, John Lyons brought forward the recommendations from the mascot group, and so that was a lot about education, educating our students, our staff, and our community. So a small group of folks from our curriculum and instruction department have been meeting with community members, and we're creating a draft plan for student, staff, and community education that I'll be bringing forth soon. And then finally, that 6th pillar, transparency. We continue to work through our public records requests. They have slowed down considerably, but we are still at a backlog because we got so many of them early on. And again, as a reminder, we're continuing to share those requests and their responses on our website. The only other thing I have, and I did write this because it's a prepared statement on an issue that came up last week, and I wanted to make sure I say this carefully, but late last week, I believe it was, I was alerted to a recent story in the Pine Cone about carvings in the sandstone following a school field trip to Carmel Beach. The article quotes a neighbor as saying that the district buses dumped 150 to 200 students off in front of our house and then went down to the beach and had a big party. And so I just wanted to take an opportunity to remind our community that these are our children. Their parents pay taxes, and they are the future of our community. These are not random people who are dumped off in our community. This was a group of middle school students who, due to COVID, have been robbed of much of their middle school experience. They simply wanted to celebrate in their own backyard. The assertion that these students, who at all times were supervised by teachers, administrators, parents, the fact that some thought they would vandalize our beach is disappointing. And one thing that I've learned in this last year, as of all kids, the kids in this district leave spaces better than they found them, especially our beach. Another disappointing aspect of the situation is that I heard about this reading our local paper. We didn't receive a call from the neighbors. The neighbors went and spoke during a city meeting. The Pine Cone, as newspapers do, this is certainly no fault of the Pine Cone. When they see something, they report on it. So the fact that that was not brought to the school district is confusing to me. The allegations are also disheartening and disrespectful to our staff, who take their responsibility leading these trips that celebrate and explore our community very seriously. Our staff members are proud of how our students conduct themselves on these trips, and it's a slap in the face when assumptions are made. And I want to end by just saying, unfortunately, this isn't the first time that a few people in our community have not given our students the benefit of the doubt or the positive intent that they deserve. It's not the majority, but a few. And I'm impressed with our students and all that they do for our community. And I would hope that others would join me in demanding that our students not be meant to feel as if this is not their home and that their concerns should not matter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah, I just want to say thank you to Ted. I'm a parent of one of those students that was down there at the beach, and I had a long conversation with her about how she and her friends often don't feel welcome in this community. And so I really appreciate you saying that, and I totally agree. These students, I know that we try to instill in our students leaving places better than you found them, and so I appreciate you addressing that. Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to add to it, Ted, that wouldn't be a bad response for the community to read, really, because I think you nailed it. Carmel, it's not uncommon to have a perspective about youngsters in the city of Carmel. And I happen to live there, and I've been around them here in the district all my life. That would be powerful. The community needs to hear stuff like that.
And I'll just echo the one comment that you said that Seabury mentioned also, and I know we've all had kids up here go through the system of Carmel Unified, and all of our students are taught from a very young age to leave whatever space they're in, whether it's the beach or a park or their campus, in a better place than when they got there. And I feel like that statement was really important that you just made. So thank you so much. All right, with that said, we'll move on to the consent calendar. So this is where the board bundles a number of items and act upon them together in one motion through the use of the consent calendar. These are routine items deemed to be non-controversial, for which board discussion is not anticipated and for which the superintendent recommends approval. There will be no discussion of these items prior to the vote unless any member of the board requests specific items to be removed for discussion. So may I please receive a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar as presented.
I second.
Board President Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
Board Member Carl Palestrini.
Yes.
Board Member Seabury Nockbar.
Yes.
All right, agenda item, moving on to action, discussion, and information items. And there's a lot of them this evening. So we will start with action item A. This is the employment agreement of the district superintendent. I will go ahead and summarize, and we will take action on the amended contract for the employment for Dr. Knight to continue as district superintendent effective July 1st, 2022. So before we get into the motions herein, I'd like to let the community and those of you that are with us this evening know that the board and the superintendent are parties to an employment agreement for the 2020-2021 school year through the 2023-2024 school years. The agreement indicates that every year following the superintendent's evaluation, the board should determine if it wishes to amend the agreement to extend the term by 1 year, and it also indicates that the board may amend the agreement to increase the superintendent's salary base on performance, increases in CPI, or other relevant factors considered reasonable and appropriate by the Board of Education. The board will consider both of these items this evening. The Board of Education of Carmel Unified School District believes that Superintendent Knight has done an effective job this first year despite many challenging obstacles. We highly commend his leadership in navigating the complexity wrought by COVID and his leadership in keeping our schools open during the pandemic. Also, he has done an outstanding job of engaging with teacher and support staff leadership in collaborating on an equitable, long-term negotiated agreement that will enable us to retain our excellent staff and recruit new ones when vacancies exist. Moreover, we admire and appreciate Dr. Knight's instructional leadership, especially in elevating student voice and his attention to all academic growth and mental well-being of all students. Dr. Knight's work ethic is impressive, and his commitment to our students has clearly been unwavering. In the near future, Dr. Knight will present us with specific goals and strategies and action plans for each of the aforementioned. As the Board of Education has the option to amend the agreement to extend the term and/or amend the superintendent's compensation, I would recommend now that the board entertain these two potential amendments separately. Before we begin, I would like to note that as a result of the superintendent's evaluation, under the agreement, an extension of the agreement for 1 year is noted in the contract. May I please receive a motion or have discussion extending the term of Dr. Knight's agreement? And if there's no discussion, happy to take a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to move to maintain and not extend the current term of the superintendent's contract through the 2023-2024 school year.
I'll second.
Board President Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
Board Member Carl Palestrini.
Yes.
Board Member Seabury Nockbar.
Yes.
I would now like to move to the question of revising the superintendent's compensation. For this year, the board would like to recognize and reward Dr. Knight's work with a one-time bonus payment. We all know how important stable, long-term leadership is to our school district, and to the extent that Dr. Knight, the Board of Education, the staff, students, parents, community, if we can all grow as a team, he is the right person for the job and the one we want and need to be our district's leader. So with that said, I'd like to move forward with any discussion or a motion on a one-time bonus payment for the superintendent.
So I'd like to say something. Ted's, you are a force. You really are a force. And Mark, what you said when it comes to collaboration and communication and the team approach and all of that, you guys, what you did with that team, to me, I'm all about the collective, and the we is what personally matters the most to me. It's all about relationships, especially in this small community, and we all know that, and we all feel that, and we all crave that desperately. And I feel like that was the biggest step and an incredible direction was where we started with all of those entities, and I'm really thankful to you for that. And you really, based on the team approach and the level of collaboration, I wrote this and I thought, I wrote trust is the word and I thought grease is the word, but we need to continue with the same level of trajectory, and I'm confident that with you at the helm, we will get there. We've had a lot of roadblocks. You are just getting your sea legs. You have not had a normal year, and I'm hoping that now we can move forward and things will become a little bit more the new normal. But I'm confident with the continued team building and the connections that you make and forge in this community that we will get there. So I'm thankful for you, and I just wanted to say that publicly.
Madam
Go
President?
ahead. Thank you, Tess.
I just wanted to make a comment and say what I really like about Ted is that while he is maybe immersed in the muck and mire of COVID, stadium lights, or whatever, he has never taken his eye off of where he wants the district to be in the future and what is right and just for the students of this district. And that is to be admired, for it is not often found in a leader.
Thank you, Anne Marie.
Yeah, I'm going to add a comment here. Most of you know I've been in this district for a long time. 25 years as administrator, now 11 years on the board. And you're probably thinking, well, this guy has no life of any kind. But having said that, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I usually know who is. And I got to be honest with you, that would be Ted. I mean, he cuts through issues like no one I've worked with before in terms of just thinking them through and coming to conclusions. And you know, it's not easy to affect change in the Carmel Unified School District because we are a bubble. We're blessed with a lot of assets and resources, but we do get stuck. And so, Ted, that's one of the tough rows to hoe here in Carmel. But anyway, we're looking for somebody with a vision, looking for somebody that would look at us from a different perspective, somebody who would try to get the organization to the next level and actually bring it up into the 21st century in a lot of ways. And Ted has done just that. So, looking forward to next fall, Ted.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just echo what many of my fellow board members have shown in terms of your characteristics. I think that you have a heart for students, and I think especially for students that are underrepresented and can kind of get lost. And I respect that the most from you, because I know that you really come from a place of passion and experience and life lessons. And so I really do appreciate that. I have no doubt that you are incredibly hard worker, and you've surrounded yourself with a team of very dedicated hard workers. And so with those two pieces, I think our district has a really bright future. And I know that you have a clear vision, and you have a very strategic pathway to get there. And the trust is building with the board members and the community and the staff. We're definitely getting there, but I can say without a doubt that I'm excited to jump behind your vision and see what next year brings. I know it's been a rough year. I know that you've had a lot of things thrown in your direction, and you've handled them all. But I'm really excited to see your strategic pathway clearer, and I'm very excited to go down that path with you.
Thank you. And I would also just like to thank you, Ted, for all of your work this year, and acknowledge the fact that it is not easy to come into this community from the outside or somewhere else. So I understand that that can be difficult to navigate, and I appreciate all of the hard work and all of the effort that you've put in thus far, and I'm looking forward to the fall. I think this is a great stepping stone and a great path forward. So thank you for everything.
So with that, I would like to move to amend the superintendent's contract by providing a one-time bonus of $12,000 pursuant to Section 2C of the contract.
I second.
Board President Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
Board Member Carl Palestrini.
Yes.
Board Member Seabury Nockbar.
Yes.
Okay. Moving on to agenda item 5B. So for my fellow board members, we are going to have a public hearing on the trustee areas, much as we did during the last meeting. I know Carl and Seabury, you weren't in attendance. So just for everybody's edification, I'll go ahead and open up the hearing. We'll hear the presentation by the consultant. We'll hear comments from the public and the Board of Education, and then I'll go ahead and close the hearing. So with that said, we'll go ahead and open up agenda item 5B. This is the public hearing to gather pre-map input on trustee areas. And we'll go ahead and get started. And I'll officially, for the documentation, open up the hearing.
Thank
And
you.
Did you stress that this is the second one?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
Shelley
We'll
was going to
do
go
that.
through. Yeah, I think she'll go ahead and set the stage for us.
Yes. Well, it's a pleasure to be back here. This is your second pre-map meeting, your last pre-map meeting, as the PowerPoint clearly delineates. This is required by law. After this second pre-map meeting, we'll have 3 post-map meetings where we can discuss maps. Let's see, I have this here. Thank you. Good, great. Just to let you know, we've talked about this last time. I have a few additional slides, but most are the same. But for our additional board members who are not here, and also for the public, we need to go through everything again. My company's been providing districting and redistricting services in Monterey County since 1990. So we appreciate the opportunity to help the communities move to by-district elections. We have a lot of experience from supervisors to virtually all the school districts in the county. Let's see. I don't know why the green light is not on anymore.
Pancho, can you just advance the slide?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, that'd be great. So tonight I will go over the changing of election method. We'll show you a few maps. I'll go over the legal requirements. And then I have a few additional slides that we didn't have from last time, helping us identify communities of interest. And what's helpful for me before we actually go and make maps is to get feedback from the board or from the public on communities of interest. What areas do you not want separated that should be together, and others that you might want to have in separate trustee areas? And then I'll conclude with the process. Next slide, please. So just to make sure everybody's aware, what's happening is right now you all the board members are elected at large, meaning that everyone in Carmel Unified elects all the trustees. What we're doing is we're moving to a by-trustee area method of election so that a trustee will need to be residing in a particular area, and only those people in the area will elect the representative. So that's a big change. If the trustees do not currently live are not currently divided appropriately among the 5 trustee areas, you will still serve out your term of office. And it's only when your term of office is over that then you would only be able to be elected from that trustee area in which you live. And these trustee areas will stay in effect until the next census, so after the 2030 census. So you're making a decision for the next 10 years. And when we do these trustee areas, we draw the lines, there are laws that are going to apply, and I'm going to talk about those shortly. Next slide, please. So the reason you're doing this is that the California Voting Rights Act basically strongly encourages jurisdictions, cities, school districts, water boards, any government agency, strongly encourages them to move to by-district elections to help minority populations improve their political power, to enhance their political power. And the board passed a resolution prior to COVID that you were going to move to by-district elections. COVID happened, so you delayed that. Subsequently, you got a letter from LULAC, a Latino organization, asking about whether you were going to continue on your path. So that is what we are doing now. We are continuing on the path of moving to by-district elections. Next slide, please. So I have a few maps for you. This is a satellite version of your district. And as you can see here, a lot of the territory is mountainous and not populated. And I'll show you a few maps that show actually where the population is located. Next slide, please. And this shows where your schools are within the district, which you're probably well aware of, but just for context. And you can also see the large Lantana Wilderness area in green, which is also very lightly populated. Next slide. And this is a population density map, and the size of the dots indicates the population size. So the larger the dot, the more population is there. And so you can see that you're concentrated in Carmel by the Sea and Carmel Valley Village and in between that area. And then there's sparsely populations elsewhere. And the next slide is a zoomed in version of where that population is. These are the data that we have. It's by census block, which is the smallest level of geography that we have data for. So these are all your little individual census blocks. We will be aggregating these to make our trustee area populations. Next slide. So now I'd like to go over some of the laws that are required. So we have federal law as well as state law. Federal law, the main requirement that's going to affect you is population equality. The populations have to be, of the trustee areas, have to be nearly equal in population. That's the main thing. In addition, there are requirements. The Voting Rights Act has requirements, and a Supreme Court decision that said you should not gerrymander based on race. Those don't affect you so much because you have such a small minority population. But I will go over that so the public is aware and the board members are aware of these laws. And then I'll go over the suggestions by the state education code. So next slide, we're going to go over the population equality. It's important that you understand this. The census counted 22,971 people in Carmel Unified. So we're going to divide that into 5 trustee areas. And if everybody was equal, they'd have 4,594 persons. So that's what we're aiming for when we make these trustee areas, as I draw the lines. And fortunately, we don't have it to have it, they don't have to be exactly equal. We have an allowed 10% deviation between the smallest and largest district. So what that means is we have 459 people that we can play with in terms of the smallest to the largest district. So because you're a small district, this is a very small district, usually have a bigger number of people to play with, we're going to be constrained a little bit, but we will do our best to give you to give identifiable lines and to use streets, for example, major streets whenever possible to make our boundary lines, or a river or some other clear geographic boundary. But it is somewhat challenging because we don't have a lot of people to use as we accumulate the trustee areas into populations. Okay, the next slide, please. So this is the Voting Rights Act, and I'll just try and be brief about this because it doesn't exactly apply to you all. But the main purpose of the Voting Rights Act is not to divide minority populations that are protected under the Federal Voting Rights Act, such as Hispanics or Asians. You don't want to divide them, and you also don't want to overly concentrate them. So you have no chance of overly concentrating the minority populations because they're so small. And from what we can tell, and I'll show you a map in a little bit, they aren't concentrated either in your district. They're fairly evenly distributed. So there is not much chance of cracking or packing, as they call it. Next slide. So ideally, this is, in an ideal world, you would have the minority populations in separate districts, and they could elect representatives of their choice. Next slide. This is an old Supreme Court case, and in the 90s, we were doing whatever we could to make minority populations be able to elect representatives of their choice. And it got so extreme that one of the cases came to the Supreme Court, and that little red line that says 12 on it in red, that was a district in North Carolina to try and maximize the African American population. It went along a freeway. Anyway, the Supreme Court said, do not do that. So you have to have sensible boundaries as much as possible. Okay, next slide. So there are measures that we have to assess the political power of a minority group. And there are 5 different statistics that I've highlighted here. And I'm going to show you these 5 different statistics anytime we give a plan. We show you a plan so you can see that. So the different statistics, and you can think Hispanics or Latinx population, we would first have the total population of the Latinx population in your district or in a trustee area. Second would be the voting age population. That's a little clearer in terms of who's eligible to vote. So that's a little more refined. Those 2 come from the census data. The third statistic is what is used by the courts when there is a disagreement about what should have happened. And that's citizens of voting age, or CVAP. And this is not based on the census data. It's based on a survey, a small survey by the Census Bureau. And so these data are often inconsistent with the census data. So they're not a great statistic to evaluate the political power of a minority group, but it's sort of what the courts use, and it's sort of the best people have to do, can use. I think probably a better measure is from the Register of Voters. We have registration data of voters, and we have actual voters, say in the presidential election. The problem with that data is that when you go to register to vote, you're not asked what your ethnicity is. So we only infer the ethnicity based on people's last name. So Spanish names and Asian names are assigned to be Latinx or Asian. And obviously there's a lot of error, some error in that, especially for women who may change their name after they get married. So the bottom line is that none of these measures are great, but maybe all together it gives you a picture of what's going on in your community. So I just wanted to give you those caveats. So for example, the next slide will show you what these 5 measures are for your district as a whole. So for example, total population, we start with 22,971. The 18 plus population, we come down to 19,512. The CVAP, based on a survey, also gives a population count. And then we have registered voters and actual voters. And if you look on the second column, the Latinx percentages, you can see that 10% of your total population is Latinx based on the census data. 8% are of voting age, and then the CVAP is 7%, and actual voters or registered voters 5%. So for any of the maps we give you, the trustee areas, we will show you this kind of data. And then this map shows the population of the district, and so the size of the round circles indicate the population size, and then the color indicates the different ethnic groups in that population based on the census data. And the Latinx community is in dark blue, and there isn't really much of a concentration anywhere in the district. It's pretty spread out. Light blue is the Asian population, which you see more in the northern part of the district. Okay, next slide. Okay, so those were the federal requirements. I just want to briefly I have one slide on the state requirements. The state makes a suggestion of the kind of things to take into account when you're drawing trustee areas. And so what they're asking you to do is consider topography, geography, cohesiveness, contiguity, integrity, compactness of territory, and communities of interest. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about communities of interest because this is where you can help us as we draw lines for you. Communities of interest have gotten more play in the last couple decades. People want to keep communities of interest together. The California Citizens Board that makes the congressional districts takes hours and hours and hours of testimony on communities of interest. And so we are also following suit in a sense. Typically, recognized neighborhoods are one of the things that people typically want to keep together as a community of interest. It could also be a subdivision, or in the case of Carmel, it may be other parts. It may be that the rural area is different than the more urban area, and they may have different concerns. So you want to keep people with similar concerns in the same trustee area to the extent that you can. Cities and unincorporated areas or unincorporated communities would be another example that is typically used. Sometimes areas with similar economic or socioeconomic status may be kept together because they have different concerns that they may come to the trustee about. And then school attendance areas for school districts may be something that is a community of interest. So I have a couple slides here. Some of them are new. I think all of them are new, actually. So this is your elementary attendance areas. And what you see here is we put the populations of your elementary attendance areas. So for example, Captain Cooper, which is a large geographic area, has only 912 people. And your other two elementary attendance areas are over 10,000. So you can't use these directly because we're looking for 4,500 or so in a trustee area, but that just gives you some context. And so one interesting thing I would say is, would you want to keep Captain Cooper together in one trustee area? Obviously, it would need to have other population as well, but that might be something where you could keep it together and not divide it. So that would be interesting to get information on. The next slide shows the populations in your cities and your unincorporated communities. So one thing that's interesting is Carmel Valley Village is 4,515 people. That's about the size for a trustee area. So one possibility is to have Carmel Valley Village as a single trustee area. So that would be something to get feedback on. Is that something that is desirable? Carmel by the Sea, 3,224 people. Del Monte Forest, 1,067. So we also could keep Carmel by the Sea, not split, if that was considered desirable, and have that combined with other population as one trustee area. It may be convenient if we can. If we do split it, we can split it along various lines, like along Junipero or Ocean, or in the other direction, east-west, as well as north-south. So those are some things that would be good to get feedback from. I think we have 2 slides of the same thing. I apologize for that. So if you want to go one more. So then in trying to get your neighborhoods, I don't believe there are any official neighborhoods in Carmel, but I went on Google Maps, and Google Maps has a suggestion on neighborhoods. And so I actually, so here's a list of those neighborhoods. And really, these are not official, so you may have, the local understanding may be different than what's on Google Maps. There is a map on the website that shows where Google has, where they think these neighborhoods are, and it would be good, I'm sorry I didn't have that in time for the presentation, but it is on your website now, so it'd be good to look at where those neighborhoods are. I just need to say Jack's Peak is outside your district, so that shouldn't be on there, and Mission Fields is not listed, and it is on the map. So when we ended up doing the map, we realized Jack's Peak was not in your district. So this is an example of perhaps using these kinds of neighborhoods as we draw the lines. There was a question last time about economic status and what data we had on economic status. This is median household income from a survey by the Census Bureau. It's by census tract. There are 9 tracts in your district, and we've sort of color shaded them so you can see Del Monte Forest has the most affluence, most of the districts in the middle section in that green, and then some of the rural area has lower income. So as we draw lines, we can sort of keep this in mind so that we, especially the rural area where the income is less, might be something where you want to keep that together. So I'd just like to say, what is your community of interest? If you all have any ideas, if the public has any ideas, the board has any ideas, it would help us. But we will develop some maps shortly, and maybe you'll have, if you don't have any feedback for us now, you will probably have some after you see some maps. Next slide, please. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the process, review that for you. So sometimes people ask, how do we actually do this? We have, fortunately now, we didn't have it so much in 1990, but now we do have computer software that lets us click on the different census blocks, and the computer accumulates them, and it's pretty easy to draw trustee areas. And if you want, if we need to, we can do this live in a board meeting. If you want to see some changes to a map that we've presented, you want a little tweak, or you want to try something different, we can do that. We look at where the minority populations, the protected groups are, and we sort of start with that and make sure we don't divide them. Again, that's not going to be such an issue in your district. We consider other communities of interest that we hear from you or from the public. We consider the cities or the unincorporated areas. We try and use major streets or geographic features when we're dividing lines. We consider compactness, which means we don't jump over a community if we don't have to. So we want to keep, so sometimes it's large, it doesn't look compact, because especially your rural area is so unpopulated, but we won't want to jump over a community. That's the official legal definition of compactness. And if reasonable, but it's going to be difficult with the board, is to keep incumbents in separate districts, because you all, some of you live very close to one another. A word about the CVRA requirements, where you have 2 pre-map meetings. This is the second one. We're going to have 3 post-map meetings. You must have at least 7 days to air a plan before you vote on it. And we also need at least 7 days in advance to air the maps before before the next meeting, which will be your first post-map meeting. And I want to say that I'm intending to get you some maps, some plans in a couple weeks. and we will post them on the website. And it would be great if you looked at them in advance, if you have any comments. I think there's going to be an open forum place that you can make comments so that we can respond to that, so that we can do as much work in advance as possible. We've already done these. We're now to June 22nd. Our next meeting is August 17th. That'll be the first post-map meeting. So hopefully we'll have plans that you can start discussing, give feedback on, and you'll have another meeting September 14th and October 19th. And if you have consensus by then you can vote on October 19 at that point. And then it needs to go to county committee approval, and then in November of 2024, it will go in effect. You've done a lot of public outreach. So these meetings are a form of public outreach and getting information on communities of interest. You also have a districting webpage devoted to this process. And we will post the draft maps on that webpage, and that will be the main way that people can get information. And you're also publicizing this process in local papers and social media. And I believe you've also have letters to groups like LULAC to inform them of the process so that they can comment if they like. And with that, I will end the discussion, end my presentation, and look forward to your discussion.
Great, thank you so much. All right, before we hear from the Board of Education, I'll go ahead and hear any comments or any questions from the public regarding the presentation. All right, seeing that there is none this evening, I will turn it over to the board. I know there was only a few new slides in there, but I know for Seabury and Carl, that was all the first time that's been presented to you.
Just one comment for our presenter. All of the areas that you described in Carmel are valid except for one, the golden rectangle rather. That's a real estate term. The rest of them are all historical. And it's based strictly on home value in the heart of Carmel. So it's not realtors. If they get a seat on the board, then that'd be great. But it's kind of ridiculous that it's even there. No offense. The Woods, historical. Hatton Fields, historical. Mission Fields, historical. City of Carmel and County, Pebble Beach. There they are.
Thank you.
I would also say too, this is very minor, but I mean, I do, and I think Sarah does as well. There's definitely a distinction when you say Carmel by the Sea versus Carmel. Carmel by the Sea is a specific area with a specific 1 mile radius, and we don't consider ourselves living in Carmel by the Sea. We consider ourselves living in Carmel. And again, it's small little nuances, but there's definitely a distinction between Carmel by the Sea and Carmel.
Two different zip codes. Downtown is 93921. The surrounding areas where you could step across the street is 93923. That's the county.
And I think, and so like, for example, since we are 93923, we're considered county. So for when, Carmel by the Sea votes, has their mayoral election and all of that, city council, we are not allowed to vote in their Carmel by the Sea elections. It's totally separate.
Okay, good.
I guess another question that I had is, I just want to make sure that we're really getting the word out there and ensuring that we put it out there, and if people have the opportunity to comment, to come in person, including like, are we going to have hearings at some of the sites, in Kashawa or down in Big Sur, or is that an option at all, or?
I don't think the hearing is, but I think, and that was going to be one of the questions I asked as well, is are there things that we don't have listed here on public outreach that you would suggest that you've seen work in other communities? If I'd pose it that way. Yeah, what have other places done? Because it's not uncommon anytime you change something for people to go, well, you didn't publicize it well enough. I didn't know. Are there things other than what we've laid out that you've seen work in other places?
I think that the website is a key part of your public outreach, especially posting the maps, the draft maps. And you could do something because you're a school district. You can send notices home with your students if possible to let them know we're having hearings, and you can go to the website and you can look up the map if you like. So that's, as a school district, you have that opportunity that other, well, actually, a lot of people have that opportunity. Like the water board will send it out in their mailer to people. But anyway, you have the students you can do that with.
You know, I think on that note, a newspaper explaining the process and the idea of what's going on, because this is brand new for this area. And yeah, Pinecone newspaper. Yeah, you know, there's not a whole lot of difference between our communities except for the minorities. So I'm thinking trying to get the story out, it would be a pretty good idea. Just to what's going on, why we're doing it.
Yeah, so,
Even for those that maybe not have any particular interest in it.
so we do have an ad that's designed to go into the Pinecone in early August. I think what I've experienced in the past is that when you advertise this so early in the process, people come and then they realize there's not a map to provide input on. And so you want to kind of engage them in those August and September months. So that's when we'll do a lot more pushes in local media and sharing out to parents.
Yeah, when's up to you.
And are we allowed to utilize Nextdoor at all? Can we use that as a platform to get the word out there?
We are not authorized
Okay.
to have a Nextdoor account. School districts are generally discouraged from doing so, but that does not prevent any one of you or any other members of the public
Okay, that's good to know.
from sharing this information on Nextdoor.
Great, thank you.
I had a quick question from one of your early slides. When you were looking at the census and the populations and sort of giving an example of where everybody is, you made a comment that, you know, when you're looking at the districting numbers specifically, that you'll do your best with the population numbers. So when you say that, what does that mean?
It was sort of a caveat that with larger districts, it's easier to have like nicer boundaries where they're very clear boundaries. And so we're going to try and give you nice boundaries, but because you're so small, sometimes we have to cut through things. So I would like to not cut through neighborhoods, and I would like to be able to use major streets if possible, or major geographic and things.
Got
So
it. Thank you for that. Sorry, thanks for clarifying that. Thank you.
One of my questions was similar to Seabury's. The letters to groups that may have an interest in the process. Are we also sending letters like in Spanish to the different community members who might not be able to read the website very clearly, or is there a translation on the website in Spanish? Perfect. Okay, thank you.
I've got a slew of questions. I have your maps, by the way, on my computer, and I keep looking at them all the time. This has been, from a mathematical perspective, this is so much fun. I'm sorry, I'm just delighted with this process. First of all, I don't know, Carl, I'm going to usurp your role as historian here and say, do you realize that it's not just Carmel by the Sea? There's a whole entire saying to it. It's Carmel by the Sea, Monterey by the Smell, and Pacific Grove by God. That was the whole entire saying. Carmel just has taken one little portion of it. Concentration of people in Carmel, is it all, I mean, we've eliminated all the second home people in that, and this is all their primary residence?
You know, it's based on the census population, and so it depends how people filled out their census questionnaire. And so if they were here on April 1, they should be saying they should have filled it out for here. If they were living somewhere else on April 1 in their first home,
Right.
they would put it there. So it just depends.
I know
Yeah.
that the census people were having a very difficult time trying to get accurate census data, especially in our outerlying areas, and resorted to going to public meetings and to church to try and get as many people, to fill out the census as they possibly could. Probably because of, our president at that time, they were rather suspicious of what he was going to do with the information. Anyway, it doesn't matter why they were doing that. Do we have an idea of where all the children are living? Because Carmel is also known as, for the newlywed and the nearly dead. So the kids tend to concentrate in certain specific areas and not necessarily in, one specific area that maybe have somebody that has a whole entire population that get to vote on a school board member and may only have a few children that are actually attending school.
Yeah. Well, we have to do the trustee areas based on the census population, not based on your school enrollment data. But that said, we've been talking with staff about getting the students geocoded for you, put on a map, like the dot distribution map.
Okay.
So if you all want to do that, if the staff, if that works out, we may have that data for you. You can't use that to make the trustee areas, but maybe it would influence where you put the lines.
Okay. Another one, how do you, all the five of us, you said, are bunched together, which I can see that, but how is our address determined? Is it?
We got your addresses from staff,
Okay.
so I don't know. And the Register of Voters would have your actual address,
Okay.
right? So I don't know if there's any difference between, actually, we got it from staff, so I don't know if they got it from the Register of Voters and if there's any difference in that.
Okay. Determination of race, what do you do when you have Caucasian father and Asian mother? How is that determined? Are they all just lumped because they have Asian, just into that Asian population? Or
You mean from the census?
from the census? I didn't know how it was
So the
determined.
census, it's self-identified. So when you fill out the census, if someone had an Asian, there's one Asian parent and one Caucasian parent. Well, so they would be listed as Asian and Caucasian, and then their kids, you can do multiple race.
Okay.
So they would be listed as a multiple race
So-
child, assuming that's how
But
people.
how does that affect your numbers on the children if they're listed under different races? Because you have a specific number per child, they'd be multiple, the children would be listed under multiple different, categories. You said you had, 5% or whatever it is,
Yeah,
black
there was-
population, and yet the children come up both black and Caucasian, then they'd be listed under both, and so they'd be propping up the numbers on both.
There's a category in there for other or
Okay.
multiple race.
Okay.
And can you go back to the a couple slides?
I could see them so well.
16. Yeah, it's under the other.
On slide 15, there's a breakdown, Poncho.
So other is a bunch of things where they actually say other, but it also is where it's multiple race.
It's
One
the slide
more?
before. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So you have about 4% of the population that's other, and that includes the multiple race.
Okay, so they will just lump them together. Thank you.
And then as on your seabeds, as individual students, because if we do G-code your students, we have their ethnicity too.
Okay.
So it's just going to be depending on how the parent specified the ethnicity of the child.
Okay.
So.
Also, you listed on your slide, so I went through all of your slides beforehand. And it says communities of interest, pick one. Do you want us to tell you right now, or do you want me to tell you later, or to whisper, put a note underneath the door? How do you want me to list
Well,
that?
For any of the board members, if you feel like there's a community, not so much your community, like where you live, but if there's a community that you think should not be divided,
Mhm.
it would be good to tell me that.
Okay. Do you want me to tell you right now?
Sure.
I think that you should be putting Big Sur and Kashawa together, not because they, you know, they have some differences going on there, but a lot of kids who have split families will have one parent living in Big Sur, the other one living in Kashawa, and they will just go home to different parents at night. You also have a lot of family members. You know, my aunt lives here and my, you know, uncle lives here. You have a lot of that community overlap. A lot of the community from one to the other knows the other people going on. And geographically, quite honestly, they're closer together than either one of them is to Carmel.
Okay, so that would be good if there's a consensus, if people are ready to say if they agree with that, because we can do the maps different ways.
I was just thinking along Carmel River
Mhm.
south,
Mm-hmm.
have one district, and then the other 4 districts, you know, go along the north band above Carmel River. So north of Carmel River would be the 4 districts, and then south of Carmel River would be the 5th district. It's huge, but in terms of population-wise, at least for my eyeballing it and kind of doing my county, it
Mhm.
kind of works out that
Mhm.
way. But that's just throwing that out there,
Mhm.
just from because I love looking at the maps. So thank you.
So were you saying outside of Carmel Valley Village, Carmel River South, but not including Carmel Valley Village?
Carmel Valley Village, the majority of Carmel Valley Village is above Carmel River.
But there's about 1,000 people south of the river that's within Carmel Valley Village. So I did look at that
Okay,
before we came,
I-
and it just,
sure that we
would
can
it
figure
be
out.
more the rural area of the? Mhm.
Yeah. Just throwing it out there.
Okay.
I've got a quick one too.
Sure.
So I actually live in the county, 1 block out of Carmel, but my address is P.O. Box 285 Carmel. And a lot of people that don't live in that very limited city limit also have P.O. boxes that would indicate that they do. They get their mail downtown. And for a lot of reasons, because, you know, it takes away the opportunity for vandalism, theft, and a lot of older people and all that. So it's really hard to get an accurate assessment of who really is living in the city of Carmel and who isn't.
You know, I know it's so interesting with Carmel, because Carmel by the Sea, because you don't have physical addresses. But I believe the census, well, they have to have done that. They've gone house by house, so they have their way of knowing where people are. So I'm sure if they did it correctly, as they intended to, you would not be in Carmel by the Sea. You would be, your house, your household would be counted in the census block outside of Carmel by the Sea.
I wish that were true. The people taking the census are often students at universities and things like that, you know. So I don't know if it
Well,
actually is.
Do you recall filling out the form, and what did you do when it asked for your address?
I really can't recall. I get all
Uh-huh.
my voter stuff at 285.
Well, I know, but they don't take P.O. boxes. It would not be a P.O. box that they would take.
But
But-
they send ballots there.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's different. The Register of Voters is different than the Census Bureau.
okay. Yeah, I'm just saying it's a pretty tricky deal.
It is tricky. So I'm just saying, if they did it right,
Yeah,
you would be counted in the census block that is outside Carmel by the Sea.
right. Okay.
I'm very curious if the school district has data on, because I know a couple families in Kashawa that have one parent in Big Sur and one in Kashawa, but I'm curious if we can tease that out to get a better sense of how well integrated are those two communities, and how well do they know each other?
Hmm.
Because I think that matters. If you're voting for someone that if you're in Big Sur and you're voting for someone
Mhm.
that lives in Kashawa, I don't know how much integration there would be there, or what would make sense. I don't know.
Just throwing out something to add on to yours, Tess. You may want to take a look at who people are using as their emergency contact, or who they're going to stay with. Because I know that during disasters, you get a lot of kids that are going from, you know, Big Sur, they'll go up and stay with family wherever that other family is, and looking at that and saying, wow, you know, they are staying in Kashawa, they are, you know, going from Kashawa and moving down to Big Sur. Or if they're both disasterized, it's like, I'm going to go out to Seaside. So you may want to take a look at that also.
I'm wondering if I could make a recommendation I wonder if it makes sense for them to go back, create some maps based on the process they've used with many other districts, and then bring those forward and just see where we're at. Because my guess is we could brainstorm this all night long, right? I can think of all types of reasons why this would be good and this would be bad. This is why we hire consultants, right?
That's why Ted's the superintendent.
But I will ask though, does the, because I would be interested in hearing from the communities of Big Sur and Kashawa. And so is the process that you create the maps and then the public has the opportunity to comment on those maps? Okay. That's great.
Yeah, that's those last 3 meetings, right? She'll bring maps forward, everybody comments, she can go back and tweak, does it again, and so it's an iterative process.
And I think that was also Jessica's point about the timing of it all, right? Like, we don't want to start advertising and sort of marketing this project until we have the maps that are viewable. So I think Jessica has
Right.
that timeline.
And then as well, when we share those maps, those members of the public that have something to share do not have to be present at one of those meetings. My email is listed as the contact. They can share just like EIR comments or any other comments to the board. They can share those with me, and those will be brought to the board for consideration as
Yeah.
well.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, I would just ask, and I'm sure Tess and Anne-Marie, you guys are already on top of this, but I would just ask that we really try to ensure that we are hearing from those communities, because those have historically been the underrepresented communities on the board. And I know you guys have your ends and ways to do that.
I think Ted's comment is right on, because I'd like to see what your preliminary data would tell you in terms of your experience and where you've done this. And I think we'd be far better prepared to probably start adding caveats and things if we could see your initial work.
Yeah. And often, I think sometimes I've come up with the perfect map, and then local knowledge comes back and you all tweak it, and it's like, oh, this was even better. So yeah, that is a good process, an iterative process.
Great. Thank you so much. We appreciate the presentation, and we'll look forward to the next one. And I will officially close this hearing and move on to agenda item 5C. This is our State of Transportation presentation with Dan Paul. And for the board's information, this is an information item only. There'll be no action taken on this evening.
You still awake, Mason?
All right, I've got Mason here tonight as well to answer questions. I'll try and go through the first couple slides fairly quickly, more information, and get into the real in-depth discussion at the end. So there's information on each slide I want to touch on. There's a lot of data for you to look at. Really, the size of our fleet is what's dictating what we can do right now. We have 14 of the transit-style buses, 8 of the minibuses. When you look at the numbers, the capacity looks really high. But when you put 2 kids in a seat, which is what really fits once you're beyond the first couple elementary grades, the capacity is not that great. So the idea of packing all the buses and running multiple routes just doesn't work. We have a number of vans, but those aren't used to transport the students home to school. That's for field trips and athletic trips. Staffing, we're staffed okay right now. We have a driver in training. We have an applicant that we're going to interview in July. But the real important thing is the last 2 bullets of what it takes to become a bus driver. It's not the same as going down to DMV and taking the written test like my daughter did Friday, and then you drive. And no, this is a very in-depth program, and every year there are more things added to it. A couple of years ago, you didn't have to interview with the CHP. Just this year, they added a new mandated federal program. There's the clearinghouse that was added a couple of years ago. So there's more and more steps. And it's really driven by a problem in the commercial driver's license, probably more background than you need. But the problem with commercial driver's license is you'll see people have jumped from state to state. You'll have a problem and lose your commercial driver's license in Texas. You'll go to Utah and you'll drive for a while there. You lose your license, then you'll jump around the United States. And what the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration did was they did a clearinghouse that has all commercial driver's license information, which stops that from happening. But it also reduces the number of drivers available because they're not able to hop around from place to place. Fiscal. We spend a lot of money on transportation. We run about 1.5 for home to school, and it really depends on how many students we're transporting for special education. We've transported as many as 7 different buses. Right now we're at 4. It's kind of a low point. But it's about $2 million a year, and we get basically nothing from the state. So we do charge for bus passes, but it's a nominal amount. You know, it's $200 for the first child, $200 for the second, $100 for the third. If you got a 4th child, that's free. And I've been asked, what would you increase that by if you were to try and gain, do a little more for the district? Really, when you're spending 1.5 million to transport the kids, bringing in another $10,000 is not offsetting that. So the question is more, what is right for our families? We really want the kids to be able to get to school and the parents to have this option. So it'd be nice to raise when gas is $7 a gallon, but it's I think more parents are going to have their kids ride the bus when it's that expensive. So I wouldn't recommend anything on that right now. Logistics. We have 10 home school routes for special ed, like I discussed. The bottom point is what you really want to look at. When we start to adjust the bell times, you're going to impact those start and stop times. It's already a very long day. You look at the first driver gets to work at 4:45. Our last driver's leaving at 7:30 p.m. If you do late start, that last driver's now leaving later, but he may still have started at 6 a.m. So you start to get into conditions where they can only work a certain number of hours in a day or be on duty in a certain number of hours a day. So we have to be careful with that moving forward. It also impacts our ability to have coverage. Your day gets longer. Somebody needs to be able to respond as a mechanic or answer the radio or telephone. It becomes challenging for the department to support that. And this one's interesting. It's just data that we gathered in 17-18 about field trips. We weren't able to gather it in 18-19 because not all the local districts were contributing. And then after that, COVID hit, so the data's worthless. But if you look at what we were doing with 22 buses and for 2,500 students, we were getting very creative making this happen. You figure there's 180 school days, and we did over 600 trips. In 18-19, we did 800. So I give a lot of credit to Mason. I'll come in some mornings, and he's sweating trying to figure out how he's going to make the 12 trips on the board happen. So what's really behind this, if we do things that will impact the routes, you potentially impact our ability to run that program, provide that service to the students. We do a lot with the number of students, number of drivers and buses we have. The only one higher than us is Pajaro with 20,000 students. So that's important to note that we are already at the limit. So we get into the impacts. This is where changes to the program are going to cause problems. Hiring drivers is a problem for everybody. It's not specific to our area, California, it's nationwide. We have 2 retirees anticipated this year, one mid-year, the other one end of the year. We do have a driver in training. We do have an interview coming up in July. Most of our ability to attract people is word of mouth. We've tried different advertising, but it ends up being word of mouth where we're able to get a driver from a Salinas district, and they tell them how good it is over here, and we get another one. And then you get somebody else. That's really how it's worked well for us. The advertising has not been the key for us. Geography. I mentioned this meeting we had in the theater a while back. We had a consultant come and look at our routes to see if we could be more creative and save any time. It is what it is. You have Highway 1, you have Conway Valley Road. It takes so much time to get to Pebble Beach or out to Palo, Colorado. It just takes that amount of time. There are no shortcuts. The buses can only go on certain roads. An important thing to know is You may be traveling in Pebble Beach and the road's narrow and the bus has to cross over the yellow line to make a turn. If a car hits that bus, no matter what the car was doing, if he was doing 90 miles an hour, the bus driver's at fault, and the bus driver will have his license suspended. So this is really important to recognize. We just can't take a shortcut in Pebble Beach to save a little time, or go up into areas above the village that I know parents are anxious to get transportation. We just can't do it. The buses can't stay on the side of the road, their side of the road, and it could cost the driver's license. Fiscal. So some of these changes may increase hours. The proposed change where we swap the routes, most of the drivers would end up with more hours. Some may go into overtime every day based on what we end up with bell times. Other options like doing everybody at all the buses at the same time, or all the start times at the same time, would mean we would end up laying off some drivers or reducing hours, which would make driver retention more difficult. You may save a little money, but you're not going to be able to keep your drivers. Logistical, the availability for field and athletic trips. It's challenging right now. You look at the number of buses we have, you say, okay, you got 14 transit buses, but you only have 10 routes. The reason we have that many buses is to do those field trips. 10 buses are out driving the routes. The mechanics are in some of those other buses dropping off the teams. When the driver gets done with his route, he's going to pick up the team. And then you always have to have spares for a breakdown. The condition we're in right now, you could have a bus sitting for 4 months waiting for parts. So that's part of the reason we have 14 transit buses. So there's not really anything we can gain there. MOT staffing, I touched on this kind of earlier. Right now, the high school bookends the day for us. So I have staff that come in on staggered schedules. They all take an hour lunch because the high school start time and end time is really the bookend of the day. If you now move the elementary first, you've made that day longer. So this goes to the last point of the bargaining unit. Do I tell people you got to take a 2-hour lunch? Do I have to hire staff? What's going to end up being the solution to that? Legislative. Anything we do that would reduce routes may be negated. There's pending legislation, I think some of you have seen it in the CSBA newsletter, that would mandate transportation for everybody more than half a mile from school. So if we chose to reduce routes, within a couple of years, we'd be required to add those back. Late start options. So there's really 3 options. Swapping bell times. It would require restructuring the bus schedules for the 8 a.m. and 8:30 starts. This is the one I was working on, and as I let Mason work on my bus routes, he brought me to reality. There are 2 routes that just do not work. Palo, Colorado and Pebble Beach. It takes the time it takes to turn around. We'd have to drop those kids off, the elementary kids, at around 7:20 at River School. In order to get back out and have enough time to get the students to the high school and middle school. It's just the time it takes. And if we tried to add a route for just those 2 in the morning, you're talking about a 2-hour route for Palo, Colorado, and an hour-and-a-half route for Pebble Beach. There's no way I could fill those positions. And right now, and a mechanic can't do it. Right now, they're our backup. If somebody's sick, a mechanic's in that bus driving. So there's not a lot of backup. The other thing with those start times is, as we ran through it, if you're dropping off the elementary at 8 o'clock out at Tularcitos, you're loading your middle school and high school kids at 8 o'clock. So not only are your elementary students dropping off, but all the parents that want to put their kids on the bus for the high school and middle school at Tularcitos are there as well. So we've got a massive traffic jam at Tularcitos. The buses will increase, so the number of miles they travel each day. So the maintenance and inspection schedule will be more frequent. They can be either by days or miles. They'll go by miles, and it's not something you can fudge. We're inspected twice a year by the CHP, and they look closely at the maintenance records and inspect every bus. The secondary transportation will be in peak traffic times. I think anybody that's gone past the high school around 8:30 in the morning knows that that's probably the worst time, unless you're going north around 3 or 4 in the afternoon. That's maybe even worse. Yeah. The Transportation support will have a longer day. I talked about that earlier. The bus availability for athletic trips, field and athletic trips, will be impacted. So right now, we normally drop off elementary around 8:25, and if the bus driver has a field trip, he waits there for the elementary field trip, because they'll generally leave around 8:45 to 9 o'clock. So they will have to wait for the drop-off of secondary. And then the drivers will have been driving for a couple hours. They're going to need a break before they can get to the elementary for their field trip. In the afternoon, what we normally do is we'll have a mechanic drop off, and then the regular driver will pick up athletic trips. We may not have that capability every day based on attendance of the drivers and the times that we end up with the bell times. So it may impact our ability to transport athletics. It may mean more field trips, more use of the vans. There's a lot of different things that could come out of this. And last option, realistically, if we want to swap bell times, we need an hour between the start times to make it work. It's just, I've crunched the numbers, I've moved some stops around, I've moved a lot of stops around, trying to condense things and make it work better. And it's just really those two, Pebble Beach and Palo, Colorado, that are driving the traffic at the elementaries that will drive the issues with this. All schools later, so there's no changes to the routes. They just shift the times. It will move transportation more into the peak traffic times. Athletic transportation will be affected by PM routes. It may be more difficult to get there to pick up the athletic teams after events are over. I haven't seen the schedules for athletics based on late start that all the schools are doing. That's really going to tell us what's going to happen with our transportation. And it'll push back the drop-off times for the late runs that you go out into Kashawa and Big Sur. Right now, the last one is 6:35 in Kashawa. So if you start 15 minutes later and end 15 minutes later, you're dropping off that student at 6:50. And anything you go beyond that, you're getting later and later to drop the students off in the outer areas. Another thing to keep in mind is the impact that potential stadium lights will have. So right now we do our late runs, we pick up at 5:15, 5:30. If we do stadium lights and late start, if there is a request that we do, and late runs, we do the late runs even later because you'll have teams practice even later. You're now pushing the drivers into potential issues with their hours of service. They may go beyond their hours of service, and basically they turn into a pumpkin at that point. They're not supposed to drive anymore when they hit that limit. So that's something we need to keep an eye on if we're thinking we'll end up doing this and run a later late run. Canceling routes and limiting transportation is the third option. There's a lot of alternatives with that. You could say we're only going to transport to the outer reaches of the district, kind of like we did in COVID. You could say we're not going to do elementary for a certain area. We're not going to do secondary. There's so many options you can look at, but they all have kind of a similar impact. They reduce the number of drivers available for field and athletic trips. It reduces the hours for the remaining drivers, which makes driver retention difficult. And it's going to increase the traffic around the school times, because if you're providing less transportation, you're now getting the parents to do more drop-offs. So you will have an impact at the school sites. And it may be negated by proposed legislation and will possibly require layoffs. And I think that was, yes. So questions? I threw a lot at you.
Thank you, Dan. That was a really great presentation. So thank you very much. A lot of it was really good, new information that I don't know that all of us have received before. So we really appreciate the level of detail and all the information in there. With that, I'll just start with Seabury or Carl, if you have any questions or comments.
Well, a couple. Well, I noticed you mentioned the two difficult routes, Dan being Palo and Pebble Beach. Well, this is for you and Mason. Palo's out because all my grandkids live there. So you guys got to figure that out. But you know, it's early tonight, Ted. They can go back down there and work on this for a little bit. Actually, you know, the ironic part about Pebble Beach is they pay more for transportation than any other part of our district in terms of the taxes they contribute to a basic aid school district. And it's pretty easy just to say, they're a bunch of rich people out there, but, they are paying for it. So that's a thought on that. A couple things come to mind. I've been looking at that CSBA stuff. Would there be any advantage going to propane instead of diesel?
Some
Cleaner,
local districts,
much cleaner.
Yeah, some local districts have done propane, and their buses never leave the yard.
Okay, that's a good answer. That one's out. Electric, I think, is out. I was reading a lot of the stuff from the state coming down on what's available. We don't really qualify for much in terms of, Ted probably knows a lot more than I do, but we just aren't in that financial situation where we're any kind of a target for that kind of relief in terms of just clean air buses. But, the other thing, too, is there any possibility for, like, staging buses starting? When we start that Kashawa run in the morning, where does that bus live?
All the buses live at MOT. They start the morning here. We used to, years ago, when I first took over the department, we had a bus staged in
Big Sur.
We actually keep the elementary bus in Big Sur, but not all the time. The problem when you stage a bus out there, if you have a problem with that bus, you're in Kashawa, it takes you an hour to get another bus out there.
Yeah.
And there are things that need to happen with the bus. The driver has to come in every morning and they do a bus checkout. And part of the reason we have them in the yard is we can eyeball that driver and make sure they're doing a bus checkout. It's very important. And when the CHP comes to inspect, they can tell if you haven't been doing the bus checkouts.
Yeah. Well, we used to do that, and that made it pretty convenient. Remember when we had a resident down there in Big Sur that just got up in the morning and drove the bus, and it probably cut a lot of the planning out at some level, but I can certainly understand times have changed. It's pretty complicated, Dan.
That's why I'm glad I have Mason. He handles all of it.
Anne Marie, Tess, any questions or comments for Dan?
Oh, I have got questions. I want you to know, I put my questions down here, so I asked ahead of time. I keep going environmental impact. I mean, this is the one big thing that I keep looking at with this. I love the idea of late start, but I keep seeing an environmental impact nightmare. We have a late start as a rural district, we don't have to do late start. I think it would be a great idea. I mean, my kids would have loved to have slept in, but I mean, I'm taking a look at the traffic patterns coming around all of our elementary schools. That's impacting all of those roads. You're looking at going in and out of the high school. That is one major road. Going in and out of the middle school, you got one major road. You can't go around that. We're going to have to add to our environmental impact report, I'm sure. That's not for you. That one's for you. And I'm just looking at it as in terms of a logistical nightmare, and I'm just going to put it out there, folks. I'm just going to say it. At what point in time do we say the manpower to be able to do this, the environmental impacts that we're going to have as a result of trying to make this work for a situation that we don't have to do, and all the money that we're going to be spending to try and get this to work? At what point in time do we call the emperor out and say the emperor's got no clothes? This may not work. So I'm just putting it out there. I know that I'm going to be the board member that everybody hates today, but I'm just putting it out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Dan or Ted, do you want to respond to any of that?
I can just talk real quickly through the environmental aspect. So in conversations with our consultant, the big thing that they're looking at would be change in miles driven. So, for example, if you look at canceling routes, so if we canceled a bus route and now instead of one bus doing a 20-mile round trip, we've got 50 parents bringing their kids, that's an environmental impact. So those types of things we have put into this revised draft EIR in these three buckets, right? There's, as Dan said, any attempt to do this is going to be one of three ways. You swap, you move everybody, or you cancel routes. As every permutation there is one of those three. And so we've actually put those three concepts in the environmental impact report so that we can identify those impacts and overcome them to the greatest degree possible. But
Follow-
that
follow up.
is,
Well, I was
how-
gonna s-
go ahead, Carl, sorry.
No, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, that is where our understanding is it's miles driven. It's not, there's no other environmental impact we have to look at other than if we do something that changes miles driven, that's the big one. Have you found something more
Well,
out?
I used the matrix that EMC used for the other, and there are potential other impacts. So if we are running the day later, we're potentially running just the site lighting later. So that's an impact to the environment. There may be an impact to energy if we're running offices longer to provide support for the school sites. It's not just MOT that would have to provide support while the bus drivers are out. Potentially you're telling the district office you got to stay open longer for HR or the business office or some other function to support the school sites. So I've sent out a draft document for our EMC to look at, and there are a lot of potential impacts, not just the miles driven.
My follow on that was not that particular issue is how secure is the rural district exemption? I've been reading a little bit about it being on a trial basis. What if it's mandated?
I think with legislators, anything's, I mean, yeah, if they were to come back later and say, you know, whatever, you've got 2 years to figure this out, then we would have no choice. From an environmental impact, the good thing about that would be then I don't believe it would fall under CEQA if it were mandatory. So we'd still have to figure it out, but if it's mandatory, we don't have to follow CEQA is my understanding. Yeah.
I have a quick question, Dan, and I'm sorry I didn't ask this beforehand, but I was just thinking in terms of mitigating the impacts, you know, since you've noted here that the Palo, Colorado and the Pebble Beach routes have the most impact, and I understand the challenges with hiring bus drivers, but with all that said, how many more buses would we have to purchase to help mitigate some of these impacts? And notwithstanding, I know that with the shortages and everything, but just if all things sort of lined up, what have you lined that? I mean, I know you think about this stuff
depends,
like all
yes.
the time.
Mason and I talk about this all the time.
I'm sure you do.
It really depends on the option you choose. If you choose the option of everybody's going to start at the same time, you'd probably need 6 buses to do that. 6 additional buses. And 6
I'm
drivers.
sorry, when you say starting at the same time, so it's not staggered?
So it's not staggered. So
Okay.
you make a decision not to move elementary, and you want to start the secondary at 8:30.
Okay.
So then you'd be 6 buses. If you wanted to do something like swapping and solve the problem with the Palo, Colorado secondary route into Pebble Beach, you'd need 2 more buses. But again, it'd be a really short route and it'd be hard to fill that position. So every option you'd look at would have a little different, but I think 6 would probably be the max.
Okay.
But I think Mason and I would need to dig in and go through the routes and just make sure that would be a good number.
Okay. Thank you for that.
6 more drivers, yeah.
Well, that's what I was saying. I understand the challenges around that. I was just asking, sort of taking a big step back. Just wanted to see. So thank you.
And say hypothetically we did choose the third option, which is, you know, saying, okay, everyone who lives within 1 mile radius of any of the schools does not have bus transportation as an option. How many would that gain us? I mean, would that be enough to fulfill?
So right now your policy is 3/4 mile from the school gets transportation. It's not really going to gain you anything. You have to eliminate a whole route or 2 whole routes to make it work. And so it'd be a large, well, you had this earlier presentation. We cover a lot of space to get 2,500 kids.
Right.
So you're just eliminating
Not
a route.
gaining much.
Yeah.
May I add something? You have to remember that when you're eliminating a route, you're now eliminating all that transportation going. So every one of those buses, which you said had how many children per bus?
56.
So
yeah.
you now have 56 kids, maybe some siblings, so knock that down to 40 extra cars going into every one of those sites.
But see, we could have them bike or walk to school.
I would like you to see, I'd like to see that actually happen. I would love it. I would love it. I would vote for getting more bike racks and everything else if you could actually get them to do that. I'm not trying to, I still think a sleep camp.
All right. Thank you. So, oh, Carl, do you have something else to add?
No, I don't, actually, but what, but you know what I'm thinking though? What are the next steps? I mean, you've vetted this transportation thing very, all the ins and outs, are there. And, so, I don't know, what are the next steps with this?
So the next step, if you think back to a few meetings ago, we talked about kind of this summer and fall of education. So we're going to be bringing forth the sleep scientists to kind of talk about the benefits of sleep. We've got an instructional minutes. So they're all going to be like this, right? Where they come in, we've got an instructional minutes so that everybody understands instructional minutes. We've got athletics and activities. So we have a series of these seminars so that when we get to December and we're ready to make a recommendation, we are making it with all of us eyes wide open, really understanding the impacts. We'll have the survey data, we'll have the focus group data. Remember, the goal in this is to be able to meet the letter of the science while overcoming as many as the obstacles as possible for or disturbing as few people as possible. But we all need to understand all the little intricacies of this, which is why we'll do, I believe we have 6 of these lined up. And then at that point, we'll be bringing forth a recommendation to the board, and you guys will have all of this information to be able to critique that and ask questions and so on and so forth, as well as data from this is what our community says they want, and this is what they absolutely don't want. And again, that will come from Hanover, which is a bunch of PhD and psychometricians who will be able to bring a level of credibility to their data.
Well, the good news is those subgroups won't be coming with the amount of money that Dan Paul is kind of bringing forward here in terms of a solution. So that's a plus.
Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you very much. All right, moving on. Agenda, and thank you, Mason, for being here this evening. Thank you very much. All right, we'll introduce Jessica Hull for agenda item 5D. We'll take action on this one. This is the approval of response to the 2021-2022 Monterey County Civil Grand Jury final report for the excellence in action for Monterey County's educational response to COVID.
Okay, this will take about 15 seconds. So on Monday, May 9th, the Monterey County Civil Grand Jury released the report that you just shared. It is our district's responsibility to respond to the report's findings and recommendations. This letter is our official district and board response, so we need to approve it here in this public meeting, and then we will submit it to the grand jury.
Excellent. May I please receive a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
Second.
Board President Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
Board Member Carl Palestrini.
Yes.
Board Member C. Barry Nachbar.
Yes.
All right, I know you're staying with us, Jessica. So
staying.
this is also another action agenda item. So this is agenda item 5E, our 2021-2022 fiscal year California dashboard with the local indicators self-evaluation report. So take it away, Jessica.
Okay, thank you so much. So this is a brief summary of our local indicators, which are part of the overall California dashboard. And there we go, perfect. The California dashboard is an online tool that shows how districts and schools are performing on the state and local indicators included in our California School Accountability System. Our local indicators are a key part of the overall summary of how a district and its schools are performing. So these local indicators require that we annually measure progress on 5 of our local indicators and report those out alongside the approval of the LCAP, which is our next agenda item. We then upload these results to be reflected in the dashboard in the fall. So I'm going to go, there we go. This table shows how the local indicators fit into the 8 state priority areas for districts. This information is gathered internally and plugged into the local performance indicator self-reflection template, which is attached to your agenda, and then it is submitted to the state. So I'm going to go over those priorities that we are responsible for, our local indicators. Priority 1, information comes strictly from SARC data. Priority 2 and 7, this information comes from administrative analysis. And as you can see, we are fully compliant and or in full implementation on these 3 priorities, priorities 1, 2, and 7. Okay. For priority 3, information was collected through our LCAP survey and through administrative and staff input. So while we are finding many of our families are sensing support and the strengthening of already established relationships, feedback does show that we must continue to work on professional learning for building partnerships and seeking input for decision making. So my continued work to improve two-way communication and the addition of the bilingual community liaison as detailed in the LCAP will help us to see progress in the priority area in future years. Last slide is on priority 6. And for priority 6, which is school climate, surveys are administered every other year on a rotational basis. So we are asked to report on student perceptions on safety and school connectedness. So as the CHIC survey was administered last year and given during distance learning, we did not ask the school safety question that we typically ask because school was not present here. So we left that part out. So we couldn't use that for the school climate. But we could use this year's administration of the Challenge Success Survey that we give through Stanford, and students shared very positive results that their teachers and staff members care for them, and they gave similar and increased scores that are higher than the national average. So this concludes the brief summary on the local indicators, and are there any additional questions?
Great, thank you so much. Do we have, go Anne-Marie.
I have a comment
Yes.
to make. You can download the California dashboard onto your phone. I have the app.
You can.
You can pull it up. When you're standing in line and you're bored out of your mind, you can go through and look at it. You can look through all different kinds of school districts too and find out all kinds of information. Just putting it out there.
Thank you for sharing.
Are there any other comments? We do need to approve this, so I would ask for a motion to approve the dashboard self-evaluation report.
I so move.
And I'll second.
Board President Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
Board Member Carl Palestrini.
Yes.
Board Member Seabury Nachbar.
Yes.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, agenda item 5F. So I'll turn this one over to Ted. This is our 2022-2023 fiscal year update to the 2021 through 24 Local Control Accountability Plan, the LCAP approval request. I would like to remind the Board of Education that we received a detailed presentation on this during the last board meeting, and we all went through it and we had healthy discussion with Blaze, who led that presentation. That was, you know, an open hearing that we did at the last meeting. So tonight we'll be simply asking for approval.
Correct. Yeah, we're requesting approval on the update to the LCAP. In addition to what Sarah said, just a reminder, we took this to parents, to staff, our bargaining units. Everybody and their brother and sister have had a chance to give feedback and input on this, and it's just continuing to move forward based on Blaze's presentation last meeting.
Ted, did you get a pretty good response rate?
It's hard for me to gauge how many people we've had participate in the past. We had a fairly full library, the 2 meetings that I went to, with representation from each school. We had parents, we had staff. I think for a district our size, it was a really good turnout, but I don't have anything to compare it to.
And John Lyons is giving the thumbs up. The same. It's okay.
That's all I needed to hear.
So with that, I'll make a motion to approve the 2022-23 fiscal year update to the 2021-2024 LCAP.
Second that.
Right?
Yes.
Board President Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
Board Member Carl Palestrini.
Yes.
Board Member Seabury Nachbar.
Yes.
All right, agenda item 5G. This is similar to the previous agenda item 5F. So this is seeking approval for the 2022-2023 fiscal year budget adoption and statement of excess reserves. Again, we received a very thorough presentation and an excellent presentation from Yvonne on this during the last meeting, and we were all able to ask a whole slew of questions. And again, we just opened and closed the hearing during the last meeting, and tonight we'll be going and asking for approval on this. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Yvonne.
Yes, Sarah, thank you. That was a very good and excellent review. And so I am just requesting approval of the CUSD 22-23 fiscal year budget.
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
Second.
Board President Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
Board Member Carl Palestrini.
Yes.
Board Member Seabury Nockbar.
Yes.
All right, thanks, Yvonne. All right, we will go ahead and open up the public hearing for agenda item 5H. So this is the public hearing for AB 1200, public hearing on collective bargaining agreement between the Carmel Unified School District and the Association of Carmel Teachers, CTA. This is the tentative 3-year agreement for the 2021-22, 2022-23, and 2023-24 school years. So I will go ahead and open this public hearing, and then we will hear the presentation as we did with the districting. We'll take comments from public, the board, and then I'll close it. So consider this hearing open.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to make the comments on this public hearing, and also it will be the same for the second public hearing, so I won't re-comment on the second one for the other agreement. So Assembly Bill 1200 requires the district to perform a financial analysis through a prescribed process when there are financial impacts to a district from a tentative collective bargaining agreement. The analysis is then sent to MCOE for additional review 10 days before the agreement is presented to the board. Our analysis indicates that the district has the financial resources available based on our multi-year projection assumptions to support the tentative agreement. This public hearing is for the CTA, the Carmel Teachers Association, for 3 years, as you mentioned. The other public hearing is for the CSEA agreement. So you'll have to open another public meeting for that, but I don't intend to re-comment on it. Because we do not formally negotiate with our non-represented employee groups, agenda item 5L seeks approval for our non-represented employee groups, but does not require a public hearing. So after you close each hearing, Craig Chavis, actually, our lead negotiator, will tell you more about what happened with the tentative agreement, give you more detail about that. And so this concludes my presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Yvonne. And we'll go ahead and hear comments from the public on this, and I will turn it over to the board. Do we have any public comments? No? Is Craig not? Okay. Do you have a public comment?
No, I'm just.
Okay. Sorry. So do we have any comments from the board on this agenda item? Okay, I have a quick comment. I would like to echo Mark Stafford's comments from earlier in the meeting. And I would just like to say that on behalf of the Board of Education, we are so proud of how this negotiation process went. We all believe that coming out of COVID, staff morale is incredibly important. And when I say staff, I mean at all levels in this district. And we feel like the collective bargaining was so successful and so collaborative and such a positive experience that we really couldn't have asked for a better experience that you all went through. So thank you to everybody who was involved with that. We would just like to extend our thanks officially for that process.
And I want to echo the thanks to the staff, to leadership, and everyone who worked in that, but also want to make sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that the big contribution the board had in this. It's not every superintendent who gets to go into negotiation and know that they have the trust of the board to do what you know is right for staff. I can think of times when we're in negotiation when it's like, is the board going to be okay with that? Absolutely. And so I just want to thank this board and make sure that our staff understands Our ability to negotiate the way we did is because the support we have from the board and their belief that we need to treat our staff well, make sure that they're taken care of, and it sure made my job really easy. So I want to make sure all of you receive your due thanks.
Well, and I just want to say, you're our people, right? What you do is what we're here for. So thank you to all of you and your part in this as
I'm
well.
going to add a piece to that too. I mean, I've been a part of this negotiation process in this district probably since the first school was built. And I've never seen anything like it. I haven't. I mean, it's always been knocked down, drag out. There's a lot of posturing. We need this, that, no, you know. So Ted comes in and puts the two groups together. That alone was a shocker for me because it's already been very separate and very self-contained and therefore difficult to manage. And so I've said this before, but I give Ted a lot of credit for bringing this process. And I got to tell you, when I found out it was over, when it was over, I was shocked because normally there's like blood on the floor and a whole bit, you know. So anyway, Ted, good job. And Stafford and company.
I'll just add, I think sometimes as superintendent, you get way too much credit when things go right, and usually too much blame when things go wrong. But I want to, you know, the brainchild of all of this was Craig and his work with Bill and Lisa and Mark and Bud. And so, again, it's pretty easy for me to get in there and support that work when you've got great leaders doing it and a board behind you. So just thanks to everybody who had a part in that.
I
Anne-Marie?
just want to
Oh.
add one thing. I had so much fun switching places, getting to know people. It was wonderful, and I put out a challenge to the rest of my board. Go to the next one, please. Really, it was very eye-opening. It was very collaborative, as I think that teachers and people who work in schools are the most collaborative people in the entire universe. So I'm just going to put that out there. So I put the challenge out to the rest of you. Go enjoy yourselves. It was lots of fun.
So how good was Stafford as the superintendent?
Very good.
You should have been offering him a contract tonight. He did well. I don't know how long he'd want the job for, but I thought he did well.
All right, I will go ahead and officially close this hearing and move on to agenda item 5I. This is where we are going to need a motion to approve the tentative agreement between ACT and CUSD for the 2021-22, 22-23, and 23-24 school years. So I'll turn it over to you, Craig.
So with absolute pleasure, I have of bringing this to you this evening. To give you a little bit of detail, for the first year, it is a 5% on schedule increase, a 3% one-time off schedule. In the second year, a 5% increase for 22-23 and a 5% increase for 23-24. The agreement is also to meet and negotiate the possibility of additional one-time off-schedule payments for 22-23 and 23-24 following the approval of the district's unaudited actuals. What this does, and I will say this as the chief HR officer for the district, is it allows our employees, one, to know exactly what's coming down the road and to be able to plan appropriately, which I can say is extremely valuable. Obviously, our economic times are very challenging, and this allows our employees to kind of take a step forward, which is absolutely critical. So I bring this for your approval.
Great, thank you. May I please receive a motion to approve?
I
Yeah, but
apologize,
first I
Sarah.
wanna
I left out one other item.
Sorry, yes.
And that was actually probably the most important thing, and that was the leaves that we discussed, and that was
Oh,
actually
right.
the flexibility around the personal necessity. And it was really a conversation around we're all professionals, and what does our contract say about that? And the language there with regards to personal necessity and adding that additional flexibility really kind of drives that home for all of us.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Tess?
Craig, I want to thank you for your work on all this too. So, okay, so I would like to make a motion to approve the tentative agreement between ACT and CUSD for 2021, 22, 2022, 23, and 23, 24.
I second.
Board President Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
Board Member Carl Palestrini.
Yes.
Board Member Seabury Nachbar.
Yes.
All right, so we are going to do this all over again for CSCA. So I would like to officially open the public hearing for AB 1200, public hearing for a collective bargaining agreement between Carmel Unified School District and the California School Employees Association tentative agreement for the 2021-2022 school year. I will go ahead and open the hearing and pass it off to you, Craig.
This is really Yvonne's work, so all I'm going to say that's a little bit different, this is a AB 1200 for a single year just due to the timing of our contracts with CSEA. And I will reiterate, because it's during budget development time, the work that Yvonne and her team has done in order to get the AB 1200s done in a timely fashion so that we could bring this we can't count that. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. So I do thank Yvonne and her staff for doing that.
All right, any comments from the board? Okay,
Can I just say one thing? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
When I said you're our people, all of our staff are our people is what I meant, even though that was the ACT section, the entire staff. So thank you.
All right, I will go ahead and close this hearing, and we will get a motion to approve on agenda item 5K. I need approval for the tentative agreement between Classified School Employee Association Local 190, CSCA, and Carmel Unified School District for the 2021-2022 school year.
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
Second.
Board President Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
Board Member Carl Palestrini.
Yes.
Board Member Seabury Nockbar.
Yes.
All right, we'll go ahead and keep Craig up there. Agenda item 5L. These are the retroactive and future salary increases for non-represented employee groups for 2021-22 and 22-23-24. We will need a motion to approve these, so this is not information only.
And the only clarification I would provide on this is because these are unrepresented groups which do not have organizations like CSEA or ACT that are involved in the process, our responsibility is actually to meet and consult with these groups. So those were set up via Zoom this year, a good way we can use Zoom, so that we could go over that information and gather input. So we did meet with each of those groups.
Clarification for you. Name some of those groups.
So some of those groups are preschool teachers, as an example. We have some classified specialists, for example, our new therapists and social workers. We have our administrators, both certificated and classified administrators, a variety of other kind of odds and ends. So we'll have our LVNs, as an example, are classified unrepresented. Our
Athletic director?
Athletic director is a certificated unrepresented individual. So they fall into approximately 5 different categories, and probably the most important one is the one that you deal with on a regular basis is our confidentials, who are classified
How about
confidentials.
psychologists, school psychologists?
School psychologists fall into the certificated unrepresented group, yes.
Okay, yeah.
But this is to make sure we take care of all of our employees.
Great. May I please receive a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
Second.
Board President Sarah
Yes.
Hines. Board
Yes.
Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
Board Member Carl Palestrini.
Yes.
Board Member Seabury Nockbar.
Yes.
All right, we are going to do one last public hearing this evening. So this is
Actually,
agenda.
we have one more item in between.
Oh, sorry.
No problem.
Totally crossed off the wrong one. Agenda item 5M. This is our 2021, 22, 22, 23 salary schedules for certificated, classified, and unrepresented employees. We'll need a motion to approve these as presented after Craig.
So my
presents.
only comment is upon approval, this would allow us to go ahead and implement the agreements that you've just approved. And I will say with special note that I will be sending out an email to our staff. It is with actually some of Yvonne's amazing staff, our 2 payroll staff members, Patty Sestowicki and Barbara Hunsdorfer, and their hard work in terms of getting the retroactive pay ready for processing and the one-time payment. The good news is that we'll actually be doing that at the end of June instead of 2 separate checks. So our employees will get an email with a nice little note that it's all the money's coming sooner.
That's excellent to hear, Craig. Thank you. And thank you, Yvonne, to everybody in your office for making that happen. May I please receive a motion to approve?
Motion to approve the salary schedules as submitted.
Second?
Board President Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
Board Member Carl Palestrini.
Yes.
Board Member Seabury Nockbar.
Yes.
All right, so now it's the last public hearing. So this is this is agenda item 5N. So this is the public hearing, consideration, and public notice of the 2022-2023 and 23-24 district initial proposal regarding collective bargaining agreement negotiations with CSCA Local 190 for consideration and public notice of the 2022-23, 23-24 district initial. Oh, I said it twice. Or maybe it's written twice. Do I need to say it twice officially?
No.
Okay. Okay. I'll officially open this hearing and for this
Perfect.
agenda item 5N. We're just-
So the sunshine proposal for the district must actually go through a two-step process. This is the first step in that process. The second step would be at the next board meeting in July. We are to make public our interest in the collective bargaining process as a district for our negotiations with CSEA. Those articles that we're making known are Article 6, Salary and Wages, Article 7, Classified Employees Professional Growth, Article 11, Evaluation Procedures, and then all associated appendices and MOUs related to those identified articles. The detail is actually in the attachment that's shown on the screen in terms of the district's interest. We believe that much of this is actually shared interest with CSEA. At the next meeting, we would be bringing this back for final approval. If there are any comments or any input at this point in time, adjustments can be made. And then CSEA's proposal will be coming at that time for you to, as a board, receive.
Great. Thank you. So at this time, do we have any comments from the public on this agenda item? No. Seeing none. Any from the board?
I just wanted a clarification. And this is just going to line the two unions together, correct? So they will be bargaining at the same time?
That is an interest that was discussed, so it is an effort by doing this to get to that same place, yes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Craig. And I will officially close this hearing. All right. Last but not least, we have Oh, absolutely.
Sorry, I just want, and I've talked with, I think, some about this, but as we just got through a huge block of all the negotiating items, I just want to make sure we all take a pause and kind of understand what an entire team of people did here, from our certified staff, our classified staff, our administrators, budget, HR, this board accomplished something that not a lot of people get to accomplish. And I want to make sure in such a long meeting that we don't lose the moment. A lot of people put a lot of hard work into this. Our staff has predictable salaries over the next few years, and we are treating people the right way. And I want to make sure we don't lose that. This is a big step for our district and our entire community tonight. So just want to make sure we take a moment to kind of take all that in.
Thank you for that. All right, agenda item 5O. This is resolution number 22-10, the Education Protection Account, EPA. We'll need to approve this one from Yvonne.
Yes, the Education Protection Act is a funding resource of our unrestricted general fund. It is not new money, it's ongoing. This is a required annual resolution in which we must detail the use of the funds for the upcoming fiscal year. We expect to receive $460,009 in total, which are distributed through a monthly appropriation from the state. The funds will be used to pay for teacher salaries and benefits, and I'm requesting approval of the resolution.
Great. Thank you, Yvonne. Any questions or comments from the board, or a motion to approve?
Motion to approve resolution 22-10, Education Protection Account.
Second.
Seabury's been trying all night. All night.
Board President Sarah
I've been
Hines.
trying
Yes.
to talk her
Board
into
Clerk
making a
Tess
motion the
Arthur.
whole
Yes.
time, but
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
Board Member Carl Palestrini.
yes.
Board Member Seabury Nockbar.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Yvonne. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Dan. Thanks to everybody who stuck with us this evening. We appreciate it. And we will see you next time. I will consider this